There are those who do what is expected of them, prescribed a path at birth by parents, society, and life circumstances. They follow that path. And there are those who do otherwise. Risk takers, mold breakers, thinkers, ideators, people who are filled with an entheos, a drive, an impulse to be other. As someone who lives an utterly unorthodox life, I have always been interested in these people. Their courage, willingness to trust themselves, and ability to stand firmly in their uniqueness inspires me. It's what helps me continue trailblazing when the lights dim and the world feels inhospitable. For a year, I worked as a journalist, speaking with and writing about every otherwise person I could find. But it wasn't enough. So, to further inspire the human spirit seeking something different, we made this. Join me on this unfolding sojourn, talking with artists, thinkers, spiritualists, and all those who live in the otherwise. I met with installation and mixed media artist Holly Wong to learn more about her creative process, which from early in her career explored themes of female subjugation and exploitation, informed by the death of her mother through complications due to alcoholism and domestic violence. This exploration, morphing over the course of many years, would lead to the vibrant, expansive work Holly is known for today. Wong showed us her creative nucleus, a small, unassuming room where she cuts and sews pieces of lace, dichroic film, cellophane, scanned images of her paintings, and whatever else strikes her, into pieces sometimes 20 plus feet wide, which she only sees in their full form upon installation. We were able to witness her at work, her stitching and cutting with a remarkable combination of meticulous and intuitive effort, allowing for a non-rigid flow state, with lines forming through color like directions on a map or veins through a leaf in sunlight. Her stitching and cutting is representative, she shared with us, of the many pieces of a human life, broken by suffering, gathered together again by courage, strength, and joy ad infinitum. After the visit, Wong and I sat down to discuss her unique development in more detail. I'm really curious about the driving force, the driving factor behind your work, so feel free to launch in.
I would say that, first of all, my work is a healing and transformational process that I engage in daily. I think many artists make work daily because it's just a part of just being whole and being alive. It's a practice, and it's in some ways, when I was really young, I used to always look for religion, and I feel like for me it is my religion.
Yeah.
So it comes from that place. And I think that it's art is my spiritual practice. I think in the most basic sense.
There is a undeniably vital quality to your work. There's a sense of spirit that lives in it, and I think hearing you say that this is your spiritual practice just really affirms what it evokes in the viewer. You said that your art practice is a healing practice for you. Can you say a little bit more about that?
I think what galvanized me really having a direction as an artist was the death of my mom when I was 15. She had died of alcoholism, and I think it really put me in a place where I didn't understand the nature or the reason of her death. And there are sort of a lot of psychosocial aspects to her death. Yeah. Domestic violence, all sorts of things that were part of that scenario. But as a kid, I really couldn't sort of put together how it was that she was alive and present, and then I just sort of watched her waste away. So in making my work as a kid, it was a way, I think, initially for me to process grief. it is really true that we go through different phases of grief in our lives. And I think that my work sort of tracks that in different ways. Um, I'm 50 years old now, and I feel like I've come to that place of empowerment in my work, which is sort of that sort of not a final phase, but a phase of sort of reemerging from something. But I think, that process comes and goes in a woman's life. And I have always said that my work is my process of becoming, even though the road has been a little bit, it's not been from point A to point B, definitely not.
So, art being a way to process your grief, it sounds like it was also a research project. It seems like, and I know this about you from prior conversations, you started to do research in college into the subjugation of women in general, pornography, the rape of Nanking. There was sort of this search. And did this come from what you saw your mom go through? And as you sort of used art as a way to metabolize it, did you sort of start looking for examples of that kind of female oppression everywhere?
I'm not even sure I was like, I want to understand why her death was that way. It was as if I saw in current events a replay of that sort of fundamental injustice. Because, in Miami, in the 1970s, as it was in many states, women were not able to find safe places to run if they were being abused. And, a lot of times cops would walk away. It was just a domestic. And I remember that growing up and being, as a kid, really, really angry. Mm-hmm. And I remembered how disempowered she felt. And so as an adult looking at current events, I saw it everywhere. And so my work in my 20s and 30s was very explicitly about genocide, rape, how rape was used as a tool of genocide. So I was, it's an interesting point about as you process grief as a woman, you are going through that process of grieving. And you don't even know that that is what you are doing. Mm-hmm. You don't even know that what you're doing is trying to process what you can't reach. Because a lot of the things that I witnessed growing up were sort of pre-verbal. Mm-hmm. But there's a place where you get to an abyss and you cannot look into the darkness any further without being subsumed by it.
I so deeply resonate with the processing of grief without even knowing that that's what you're doing. I think sometimes, especially as women, I don't want to speak for you, but I know I can stay in anger longer because I feel stronger when I'm there. I feel empowered by the ferocity that comes with feeling angry. And then you get underneath it, and there's this devastating sadness that also has to be processed, has to be integrated. So I'm curious about, in that angry sort of early 20s, maybe 20s to 30s processing period, you just said, you can only go so deep into the darkness before basically it either kills you or you decide to find the light. When did that point hit for you?
Well, I think that I sort of went through this process well through the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. That's where huge. I would sort of flip back. There were different things that I was focusing on. Sometimes it was sort of a deconstruction of pornography. I remembered watching a lot of pornography when I was at the San Francisco Art Institute and New Genres, and my intent was to deconstruct it, mm-hmm. to deny the desire in it. So I used a lot of black-white video techniques to obfuscate the images. And I think that there's something really punishing about watching that kind of pornography, to sort of subject yourself over and over to it. There's this way in which you start to see that objectification, and it's hard not to somehow internalize that. Looking at these images over and over, you get to sort of a breaking point, and you're not clear what is you and what is your story. And I think this is when you deal with a lot of repressed memory, it is very hard to reach your story.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of women can't heal because they can't reach that story.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as we sort of touched upon, becoming anorexic in my early 40s was, I think, something, a lot of women go through that earlier in their lives, typically in their teens. For me, it was later, but I do view anorexia as very much about denial of the physical. It's about disappearance. I mean, a lot of people think that anorexia or eating orders in general are about wanting to be pretty or wanting to be thin or being obsessed with that world. And perhaps there's an aspect of it, but it's really about disappearance. It's about turning rage in on yourself. And I think at some point you can't keep doing that.
Mm-hmm.
You really can't keep destroying yourself. And I think the turning point in my life where I felt like I really started to make the work that you see here, which is far more fluid and far more sort of, I guess, realized, is when I decided you either want to live or you want to die. And with anorexia, you have to make a choice because it will grip you and it's going to take you down unless you make a decision that you want to live. You have to say yes.
Mm-hmm.
So this artwork, all of this work, whether it was Guardian of the Spirits or silent music or any of this work, is about saying yes. And it also means that I look at my past and I have to let it go. It is as if I have no past. I only have now.
In the 80s and 90s, you really dove into that really brutal work. And it sounds like in your 40s, it brought you physically to your knees. It brought you to a place where you could no longer practice via a self-punishing, inadvertently self-punishing form of artistic research your way through your grief. And so you sought to take care of your anorexia. And how did that go for you?
There were many steps in this process, and one of the things that I became obsessed with was hospital gauze and the notion of psychiatric restraints, and the idea of, I would knot these things and sew them and knot them and stretch them across my bedroom, and I think I was fearful of the whole notion of psychiatric restraints, which, is an unfortunate reality in some settings. But I think as a woman, I was afraid of this notion of mental illness being turned on us.
In this process, it's like you have this angry period, and then you have a breaking point, and you have this really beautiful, almost like self-validating period during which you're saying, I'm not well, I'm anorexic, and that's the reality, and I need to now take care of myself. And I also, in doing this, am validating my experience and knowing too that myriad women, women for generations, our mothers and grandmothers have been invalidated in those experiences, being told, you're just crazy, like that's not a real thing. When it is such a real thing, and the way that women throughout history have been sort of dismissed as insane, I think it's really powerful that you had a mental illness or an experience of a mental illness that you investigated it while validating is really powerful. You almost lived it, lived your way through it, and sort of researched it at the same time.
You kind of have to go through that cycle. And I read up as much as I could about it. And I did take definitely a very sort of feminist perspective that I was going to reclaim my life.
Yeah, that's, I think, what I'm hearing is a lot of reclamation.
I did. And I got really into sort of women's spirituality and started to study about goddesses. And I think that's where a lot of this work started to draw from, is this notion of the sacred female, and became rather fixated on a lot of that. And so a lot of the fiber-based work, including silent music, is very much about it having an internal voice in your head that is sacred and whole. So a lot of this work is about, if you look at all these different fractures, and I was talking about this when you came by the studio, they're all about fragmentation, but they all come together. People often say, well, she's broken or she's damaged goods.
Yeah.
And I feel like my work is really about reclaiming the damaged goods. It's about mending and putting things together. The idea that you could damage yourself, and I think a lot of the things that we do to ourselves are self-inflicted, but that you could heal that you could repair that you could be a force of reconstruction, not just destruction. Mm-hmm. And that healing is possible. And so much of this work is sort of like, I think when you look at this work, there's a way in which it's kind of damaged, right? It's kind of, it's not a slick thing, like I really admire, some women really can sew and it's beautiful and it's like, it's like, that's awesome. I have no idea how to do that, but, but I can put together from that brokenness. I really believe that beauty stems from that brokenness. And that is what definitely this work is about, is that in our brokenness is our beauty, not the other way around.
I think so many people feel like after a shattering experience, there is no resolution to be found. There's this sort of finality of like, oh, I'm broken, or oh, I'm damaged. And that's just not the case. It reminds me of the concept of wabi-sabi, like filling in a crack with gold, and then that being the most beautiful part of the whole vase. It's through my mom always says something like, through the cracks is how the light gets in. I definitely want this work to reach people in that way. I want it, I have talked a lot about women just because I am a woman, but I very much embrace that healing needs to happen on all levels, all genders, and beyond gender. Yeah, I agree. And I think it's really important to advocate for women, and also to acknowledge that this message is not just for women. The concept of healing it's humanity. Humanity needs to heal. And all of that is in this larger scope of like the wounds we're carrying that inform or falsely inform who we are and who we can be, and then getting out of that, getting through that. Earlier on in your work, you found this sort of like inner feminine voice. This was a question I didn't ask, but I'd actually like to. How did you tap into that? How did you find that strong inner feminine voice? I think I had, a lot of women in my life that told me, a lot of mentors that I had that told me that, you get to decide who you're going to be. You get to choose what your life is going to be. Because I always was like, oh, I'm a victim of circumstances. My mom was a victim, so-and-so was and they were like, you actually get to choose what your life is. You can claim it as how you want it to be this day forward. And it's up to you, and if you sort of, promote that victim consciousness, that is where you will be. Or you can make a decision that you want to make your best artwork. And maybe I am old, and maybe I am whatever, and it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like you've got to let go of all of that and just say, I'm going to do my best work today. And none of the rest of it matters. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like the voice that you find is the voice that says yes. The voice. Yeah. And you get super clear. You're either going to say yes and you're going to live and you're going to thrive, or you're going to play small and you're going to either die or be in the shadows. Yeah, and that sucks. I don't want to be in the shadows, on any level of my life. Totally. Yeah, I love that.
Holly's story is an inspiring one.
Through our conversation, I learned of her journey through her grief, a process that began even before she was able to identify it, and her eventual emergence into resolution of her past and loving acceptance of her present. In her early artistic career, Holly's work was punishing, hard, pushing the boundaries of female exploitation and oppression as she sought to make sense of what happened to her mother, herself, and so many women. Holly ferociously grieved in a vocal and insisting way. She wore her pain like an armor. But slowly, that kind of violent grieving began to consume her until her internal pain manifested in a war upon herself that required her complete attention. And so, without any other choice, and thankfully with the support of many who love her, Holly confronted her own pain, honored her own vulnerability, validated her experience as a woman suffering from her past, her present, and from simply being a woman in this world. She traversed her darknesses, allowed them in, lived them, explored them, turned them over in her hands. That willingness to see and accept her trauma is what brought Holly into the light. Not perfection or days free from pain or a flawless existence, but a sense of being free from the grip of oppressive grief. A wholeness, a presence that comes from acceptance and release. Holly was able to fully actualize as an artist, making work born from a space of self-attunement and empowerment. The work we see as a result is a triumphant testament to her strength and her journey and her willingness to embrace her darkness and allow it to alchemicalize into light. I am inspired by her courage and in awe of her art. I hope you are too.
Thanks for watching. Hopefully there was something in that video that inspired you that you can take with you throughout the week. Feel free to share this video with a friend or a family member, and be sure to like and subscribe so we can keep giving you awesome content. If you want to learn more about the show, you can do so by visiting otherwisewithjaneharvey.com. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter so you can get the latest in merch, episodes, podcasts, blogs, etc. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.